Emma Wright. Emma, I'm guessing that we met a couple of times in different conferences, and we share some interest, in particular in interest about the wound care, as well as the research interest on remote patient monitoring. And Emma definitely is a driver on that area. Emma is a global MedTech executive with over 25 years of experience leading medical device innovation across startups and multinational companies in the UK, US, and Sweden. Her work has focused on developing and commercializing wound care, reconstructive surgery, and orthopedic devices that promote tissue repair. Passionate about translating innovation from bench to bedside, she has spent the last decade driving clinical, medical, and health economic strategies to improve patient outcome and healthcare value. Emma is a strong advocate for patient-centered care and navigating market access to ensure impactful technology reach those who need them. So it's perfectly in line of the mission of the C2SHIP. Emma, I know that you are joining from UK. It's the afternoon. And I'm so grateful that you accepted our invitation and coming and share your thoughts. I stopped sharing this slide, and please go ahead and share your slide, and looking forward to your talk.
Great, thank you, Bijan. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I will try not to cough my way through this presentation. Unfortunately, I was in the US last week and I brought COVID home with me, so I will do my best to get through the presentation. But it was great to hear so much about what C2SHIP are trying to achieve and your approach to decentralized care. And I think that very much resonates with some of our thinking here at Monlycke. Try and get this into a presentation mode for you. Can you see it in a presentation mode? Because I see it in a
no.
standard mode.
I know sometimes it's happening, yes.
Yeah,
Usually.
it doesn't want to put it into presentation mode for some reason. Let me have a it's tried to switch me to Teams, I think. I won't do that. Okay. Maybe.
Yeah, sometimes you may need unshare it and then putting on presentation mode and then sharing on your screen. But we can see it now on the screen very well.
Are you sure? Okay. All right. So we'll give it a go. So as Bijan said, I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Monlycke Healthcare. I've been with Monlycke for 7 years. And for those of you that don't really know who Monlycke are, we are Swedish-based, but a global healthcare company. So we're based in Gothenburg, Sweden. We've actually just opened a brand new headquarters in what's called GoCo in Gothenburg. It's an innovation center founded by AstraZeneca. We share ownership, similar owners, same owners as AstraZeneca. So we've just moved into that brand new building in that innovations city, and that's really great because of the number of collaborations that are all around us. So we have nearly 9,000 employees. You can see we manufacture across the world in 8 countries. We're a very old company, over 175 years old. We've got 4 businesses. Our biggest business by far is in the wound care space. So when you talk about decentralized care, when we think about chronic wounds, we think that's perfect for that approach to healthcare. The 3 other businesses, Operating Room Solutions is predominantly an OUS business, really around driving efficiency in the operating room. Biogel is the leading brand in surgical gloves, with the double gloving system being developed by Monlycke a number of years ago to try and improve safety for surgeons and patients. And then antiseptics in the sense of our Hibi range, so our chlorhexidine gluconate range. But I'll probably speak a lot about wound care because that's by far our biggest business. But I think as a business, for any business, the pace of change is probably the biggest threat that we see for healthcare today. Change is becoming the new normal. And I think when we look at that, in the last 5 years alone, we've survived a global pandemic. We've got war and geopolitical tensions across the world. We're hopefully stepping back from the edge of a trade war. But also at the same time, we've seen an explosion in AI. We've seen gene editing come to the fore to treat, conditions that previously we couldn't treat. And now we're seeing, the evolution of the new weight loss drugs that are going to truly revolutionize our approach to diabetes and other conditions. And I think when you work for a company like Monlycke that's 175 years old, the question is, how do we match that pace of change? Companies of our age do not have that pace of change. We're very traditional in our approach, in our way of thinking, and in our product offering. And so this has been our biggest challenge. And we've really had to embrace it, particularly when we look what's going on in health tech. And we see those IT-led solutions that are much more agile, more nimble than us, very much focused on the patient. And they're made by younger, quicker, smaller companies. And they really are causing a paradigm shift in the industry. And then you compare them to ourselves and our competitors who are traditional, innovation-led rather than customer-led, and really have a long-term history, but don't have any nimbleness in that history. And I think really it's not about one or the other. I think we can learn from each other, and you'll see that as I talk through some of the work we're doing as Monlycke, how MedTech and health tech can actually complement each other in delivering that holistic patient experience. And I think that patient experience has been missing in some areas of medicine, particularly in the wound care space for many years. Wound care, to me, people ask, this is my third time working in wound care. People ask, why do you keep going back to wound care? Because it's in the dark ages. But that's the exact reason why I keep coming back to wound care, because it is in the dark ages, and with that comes a whole lot of potential. The amount of money spent on chronic wound care is extraordinary. And when you look at the morbidity and mortality rates associated with chronic wounds, not only is expenditure more than what we spend on cancer treatment, but so are the morbidity and mortality rates. And it's one of those areas of medicine that really hasn't evolved. And I think there's many reasons for that. But part of it is really a lack of innovation and a lack of holistic thinking in the space. And I thought this was an interesting paper that came out of the McKinsey Health Institute last year that was really talking about holistic health. And this resonated because at Monlycke, we often talk about sustainable health. And, the WHO talk about extending your life isn't merely adding years to your life, but it's adding life to those years. And I think that's something that very much resonates with me, particularly in that wound care space. What we do to chronic wound patients is in many ways barbaric. We wrap them up in tight bandages, we put them in casts that they can't walk in sometimes, we bring sharp knives to their wounds that are already painful. And, they are living with wounds that smell, that are leaking fluid, that basically have such a huge impact on their quality of life, that there is no way a chronic wound patient can have holistic health, that they can have life added to their years. And so when you looked at the piece by McKinsey, they broke it down into these 8 elements. And what was really key to me is that innovation runs through each of these. And, I felt, well, this is a space where Monlycke has exceeded and excelled in the past. We've invested in science. We've changed the direction of healthcare in spaces like pressure ulcer prevention. But where we haven't really done a lot is supporting that societal participation. I think that's something we see in the wound care space a lot is, actually realizing that patient empowerment, going beyond patient engagement, is absolutely key. A lot of the time in wound care, I see a lot of wasted funding and resources because patients aren't compliant with what we do to them. And given what I just said, the type of things we do to them, there is no wonder they are not compliant. You know, we have patients who can't put on a pair of socks, never mind a compression wrap. And so I think understanding that societal participation more, looking at that consumer-driven wellness, and really that public safety aspect of it is a really bringing us more up to what we term internally as sustainable healthcare. And when we talk about sustainable healthcare, we don't just talk about the patient, we're also talking about the clinicians. We've got clinicians in a whole world of pain post-COVID, and we've got burnout issues, stress, clinicians who I never thought would leave hands-on clinical care have left in droves over the last 5 years. And so as a Nordic-based company, we're a big believer in sustainability, but I think it is much more than the green mindset. It's also about, encouraging and ensuring we have well-being of everyone involved, all those stakeholders in the healthcare system, and being mindful of all the decisions that are made and making sure everyone is empowered to do what they need to do and work together to truly deliver sustainable healthcare. And so as part of that, at Monlycke, we often talk about being customer-centric. And that's what we think is at the heart of being able to truly deliver sustainable healthcare, is being able to understand what our customers need. And sometimes the question is, why do we take that approach? And I think some of these statements and quotes here are really clear that we cannot afford not to be customer-centric. We know that companies with a customer experience mindset drive revenue 4 to 8% higher than the rest of the industry. We know with hospitals that have a higher patient satisfaction scores, they have lower 30-day readmission rates. We know how much that 30-day readmission is a massive drain on a hospital's ability to have any level of profitability. And we know that customer-centric companies are ultimately 60% more profitable. And so in 2021, Monlycke took the decision to really start to transform our approach by being customer-centric. And what that simply means is just seeing everything through the eyes of the customer. And we did a very large project in 21. So just as the pandemic was ending, where our strategy was based around ethnographic research. So rather than taking the usual business consultancy type approach to our next 5-year strategic period, we took an ethnographic approach. We interviewed thousands of clinicians, of patients, of payers. We worked with a third party who sat in hospitals, in clinics, even in patients' homes, and just observed behaviors. And we developed a strategic plan based on those customer needs that were identified through that ethnographic work. And I think this was one of the challenges that came out of that work. This is purely representative. And living in London, I call it the customer tube map. But I think this was one of the realities for Monlycke was, as a company, we'd been very focused on nurses for many, many years. We sold predominantly wound care dressings, and our customer was the nurse. And we've, seen the emergence of, over the last 10, 15 years, the payer and how much of that stakeholder strength and decision-making has swung into that payer space. But actually, when we did the ethnographic work, we realized how many customers were out there, including the patient. And I think what we realized was those in the green circles were the traditional customers we focused on. But actually, what's interesting is what's represented by the red markings. And that's really where the customers' needs weren't aligned and where we had areas of disconnect. And then a very simple example is a patient wants to have the best product given to them by the best clinician in the best care setting. And the payer wants to give the patient the most cost-effective product that gives them the outcome they can afford to give, move the patient out of their care setting in the most cost-effective way. and where the clinician wants the patient to have the best experience and not have them represent with a complication or a recurrence. And you can see there in that very simple healthcare example, there is not alignment of the needs with the value drivers of those three customer types. And so where we started to focus in was where we had areas of disconnect between all the customer stakeholders that may exist in a patient's journey as they go through, in our case, a wound care journey, and trying to understand where we had misalignment of the value drivers, and then use that to drive innovation that was maybe more focused on sometimes a compromise, because we can't deliver, if they're so disconnected, we can't meet everyone's needs. It's not always possible. Where could we produce innovative products that would meet enough of everyone's needs to allow these products to truly move through the system, move through the market access, and actually make a difference to the patient? And just an example of that for, speaking to a US audience, I think this is quite interesting when we look at the patient journey. And particularly, we see the shift of patients from the hospital to being treated in outpatient settings, even in their own home, and everything you talk about in decentralized care. And one of the challenges here is really who is responsible for the patient? In the past, the answer was always the clinician. And I'm not sure that's the case today. We have a sick patient in the middle of this image, and they can go to their primary care, and the primary care can say, I can help you, it's simple, here's the prescription, you don't need to come back, you'll get better. Or they'll say, you're too complex for me, you've got many comorbidities, I really can't help you, I don't have the expertise, I'll refer you on. But a lot of the time in these more complex cases, the primary care don't want to deal with these patients. They want to pass them on because they can't treat them, they're costing them money, they want them off their books. And, some of these patients require surgical procedures, they go into the hospitals, there is a waiting list. I think that's probably a bigger problem outside of the US than in the US. The hospital's always keen to operate, but then how many times do patients leave hospitals with a complication that they didn't have when they went in? They can go to the specialist clinics where they can see specialized care. The clinician can give the patient a treatment program, they can hand them a prescription, and they'll say, I'll see you again in 2 weeks. The challenge with that is then that prescription may go to the DME to be filled. Who knows what the DME is going to deliver the same product as the clinician wanted. Particularly if it's a specific product, often they get substituted. That patient maybe doesn't know how to use that product if they're doing self-care at home. Maybe you've got a home health agency involved. That home health agency is often being managed by healthcare assistants that don't have specialized knowledge. And then the patient's back at the clinic 2 weeks' time, the wound has got worse, and the clinician goes, what happened? Why are you not following the treatment plan? And we have this constant disconnect of care. We see it in ambulatory surgical centres where there's a push to do more surgery in these settings. But again, the patients can sometimes be too complex and end up being referred back to the hospital. And then there's this whole drive for home care, which I think is very much the future. And so we have this very much this broken journey right now. And this can sound quite negative, but I think the solution as to how this is going to become connected and how we can drive a continuum of care, the answer is close. And that's because it's been enabled by the digital revolution. Because that digitalization of all these processes is going to allow us to have that continuum of care, to have clinicians speaking to clinicians, to insurers, to payers, to patients, being able to intervene sooner and, hopefully have a complete and relatively seamless continuum of care. And for Monlycke, we often talk about this as an ecosystem of care. And if you think about in the middle of this flower, you can see this is our vision is to revolutionize care for people and planet. And we have planet in there because we very much believe in that sustainability aspect. But it's much more, as I said earlier, than the green mindset. It's also about that well-being of the clinician, the empowerment of the patient, as well as how we normally think about sustainability, reducing waste, using more sustainable materials, the cyclical side of managing sustainability. But if we look at all the elements, for Monlycke, we've always been on that purple side. We've been product focused, and particularly we've been legacy product. What drives our business today is from innovations that are 20 to 30 years old at this point. And so we have a drive to get into more radical innovations, but also digital solutions, because I think that's what I see. I see a company that in 10, 15 years' time, I don't think Monlycke will be a product company. I think we will be a digital company. And that's a huge shift, particularly for a company of 175 years of selling product. But I could see it to the point where product will always exist, but maybe we're selling a digital service and we're giving away the product. Whereas today we're selling product and giving away elements of a digital service. I think, again, you then get into the green area where we touch on it a little bit today, which is really about that support. So today we do a lot in education, particularly in pressure ulcer prevention. We want to do more in patient empowerment, and I'll give an example of that in the next couple of slides. We want to do a lot to standardize care. I think if you look at chronic wounds, the vast majority of patients can be healed if we did standardized treatment. We know how to treat chronic wound patients. The challenge is getting that knowledge out to that great vast of differing disciplines and specialties that touch chronic wounds. And so if we can standardize care through digital approaches and disseminate knowledge to a wider number of clinicians, we know we will get better outcomes. And then the third part of it is really the enablement of it. There is so much data. Again, with that digital revolution, being able to collect data to show that every decision that's made is evidence-based and data-driven. That will constantly allow us to evolve our knowledge. It will allow us to get more into personalized treatment protocols, and it's going to be so key as to how we move forward. It will drive that efficiency. I think one of the biggest things we hear from customers and clinicians today is how burdensome documentation is for them. The challenges they have with audits, the fact that it's limited the amount of time they have for hands-on patient care. So again, what can we do to drive efficiency and remove that burdensome part of the documentation? Really having that continuum of care. I've said end-to-end control here, but it's the same thing, that we basically know where a patient is, know what's happening to them, and it's a smooth transition of care as they pop up in these different care settings. Chronic wound patients, they can emerge anywhere. They don't all start in one place. It's not like an incision patient who starts in the hospital with a surgical procedure. The chronic wound patients can pop up in every sort of care setting you can think of. And they move around them in totally random order. So being able to have that end-to-end control. For us, that's also the company is partly about vertical integration. So we don't want to become an owner of wound care clinics, but we certainly want to be able to vertically integrate to be able to influence that end-to-end piece. And then I've already spoken a little bit about sustainability. I think just to go a little bit about how we plan to do this, these are our values, and the bottom one is embrace partnerships, which I wanted to talk about because I think that's very valid to C2 ship, really. Partnerships are really key because I think we can't do it alone, and if we try and do it alone, we are missing opportunities. At the moment, I've said this at the beginning, MedTech is a very short-term focus, whereas healthcare has really longer-term needs. We need to move beyond our traditional capabilities. If we're going to shift from selling products to selling digital services, it has a whole different capability set. We need to keep the customer at the heart of everything we do, and we need to take a much more holistic approach. And I would go as far as saying that we need to become part of the solution, because today I would say we're part of the problem. And an example of that is Monlycke sells billions of dressings on an annual basis. But I often wonder how many of those dressings are on the right patient at the right time to get the right outcome. And we could say we should care about that, because at the heart of that sustainability is that right product, right patient, right time. And so that's why I think it's time for MedTech to take a place at the table, a table that sometimes we've been excluded from. Government agencies or medical societies, they don't always want to have the MedTech industry present. They sometimes think we're there for not the right reasons. But I think actually, and as you see with what you're doing here, there is a role for MedTech and health tech to become part of the solution and have something to say. And we really need to unite. And I often talk of us shifting from being a supplier of product to a partner of healthcare. And I think that's really why we ultimately need to embrace change. And we're only going to be able to do that through partnership. We cannot do this in isolation. The problem is just genuinely too large to deal with. And that kind of brings us as to how Monlycke is trying to embrace that change, is moving from product-led to customer-led strategy, moving from a focus on the clinician to having a focus on multiple stakeholders. We've already started to shift from product to solutions, but ultimately that's still very much product-based. We now want to move to that ecosystem of care and being able to use that digital era to move us into enabling that continuum of care that we so require in chronic wound care. Moving from supply to partner, I spoke about, but also global to local. So this is an interesting one. I think large companies like ourselves, we try and blanket the world with the same approach, but actually different countries need different things, different healthcare systems need different things. And by listening to our local countries and local needs and putting that first and foremost, that can influence our global strategy in a much more customer-centric way. And then finally, knowing it all to learn it all. This is a really big one for me. There is probably nothing we don't know about wound dressings, but there's an awful lot we don't know about chronic wound care. And I think that's where you have to shift your approach, from being an expert in something to say, actually, we need to learn it. And how do we learn it all? Well, an example that we've taken is these two companies, MediWound and Siren Care. We have placed investments in these two companies in the last 12 months. And this is an example of how we use partnership to learn it all. In the past, we may have looked to do outright acquisitions of companies, and these two companies would have probably carried too much risk and be at too much of an early stage for Monlycke to have done those acquisitions. But we believe both of them represent something really unique for the future. MediWound are developing an enzymatic debrider. That's a nutraceutical approach, and they are in a phase 3 trial in the US today to launch it for a VLU indication. And why are we interested in that? It allows a broad group of clinicians and potentially even patients themselves to debride their wound, and really starts to move us into those non-specialized settings, even into the patient's own home. The importance of wound bed preparation cannot be undervalued, and so be able to allow a technology to do it in a much simpler way, in which a wider group of patients can be appropriately debrided, was something that we see as to be key. It's a pharmaceutical. We are not a pharmaceutical company. So by making an investment in partnering with MediWound, we are able to learn from them, and equally they are able to learn from us. And we are two very different companies with very different cultures, and it allows both cultures to flourish. Sometimes you see when you acquire a technology, I think sometimes the first thing that happens is that culture of the acquired company gets destroyed way too quickly, and a lot of value is lost. So by partnering, we avoid that. We also de-risk any future potential acquisitions of these companies by being able to work alongside them for a period of time. Siren Care is another one around decentralizing care. I'm sure this is a technology that some of you are familiar with. It's a sensor-based technology where the sensors are in the textile that is woven into a pair of socks for patients at risk of diabetic foot ulcers. The sensors detect temperature differences between the 2 feet, and they send an early alert to nurses when there is a certain temperature difference. Those nurses then call the patients and ask them to examine their feet, ask them about their daily activity levels, and will make a decision as to whether to refer them on to their clinician. It's a great approach of putting a physical product in a box, like a pair of socks, into something that is so digitally enabled. So the patients can wear these socks every day or a limited amount of time. We'll still get a sufficient amount of data. It's seamless for a patient because it's a sock. Patients wear socks. So it's a good way of helping with patient education. It's empowering the patient to understand how they can influence their risk and manage their risk of getting a diabetic foot ulcer. And it's allowing us to, again, to learn in the digital space where we have limited experience today from a very young, innovative, fast-moving company, that we would never be able to do this internally. It would take us so long to do. So these are examples of where we have placed partnerships to allow us to learn and get value out of it, and also help these companies to develop. And so I think just to get to the final slide, for Monlycke, the clock is ticking. And what I mean there is we've been a very traditional wound care company for a very long time. But that's not sustainable moving forward. So we've had to look at how we can embrace new technology that not only can physically be used to treat patients, but can educate, can disseminate knowledge, and can drive greater patient empowerment. We see the collaboration between the patient, the clinician, the payer, and the industry is so critical to driving that change. And really, we think now is the time to challenge the status quo of wound care. And that's why we will openly give presentations like this. We'll share the slides quite happily, because we think it's important that we do all work together, including with our competitors, because this isn't going to be something that can be addressed by one player working in isolation in the market space. So with that, thank you very much for listening. And yeah, if anyone has any questions or any comments, I'm happy to take them.
Wow, amazing. I really enjoyed the talk. I'm sure that the audience also enjoy as well. As a researcher advocating of digital health and decentralized care for some time, it's energizing to hear industry leaders like you, Emma, echoing this vision. It reassures us that we are on the right path. I also love some of the quote from you that indicating actually right patient, right time, and right product. So this is very important, and also the value of the partnership. We have some great leaders actually in the audience, and actually we have Dr. No Wang that leading the wound care at UCLA, as well as VA at Los Angeles. And also at the same time, we have Dr. Fukuta. She is in the community hospital in Houston, leading one of the largest community hospital and dealing with the underserved patient population. And we have actually Dr. Kronov, that I know that probably he's very happy to hear your talk. He's the leading diabetes science technology and advocating for quite a long time about the importance of the digital health and for better management of the patient, and many more. We have some of the industry leaders like Margaret from Medline, and I saw also Nicole from Best Buy Health, that they are also sharing the same vision to developing digital health to improve care. I'm seeing also Panta, that quite a long time doing research on pressure ulcer, and also Fartaj from Safety Spec, that they are leading about some of the technology that can facilitate early detection of pressure ulcer. So it's a very mixed audience, and I'm hoping that engage them to discuss about some of the needs that we have. Maybe I'm going with Dr. Nobong. Dr. Nobong, I was wondering that whether you are here, and I know that you are a great advocate for technology, and you are Saudi VA and also UCLA Clinic. So what do you think when I'm hearing about that vision? And I'm sure that you are very happy to see some of the large companies like Monlycke plan to shift over 100, over century business modeling now to going to the direction of the digital technology.
Thank you. That was, by the way, that was an excellent presentation. It's very exciting, and yeah, excited to be part of this group. Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential, Dr. Nafi, as you stated, and I think the collaboration with, like you said, UCLA and also the VA and all the other facilities that are on here also. So I mean, we're here. We'd love to do whatever it takes to collaborate with Emma and her team and all the other members that are on this team also. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm seeing that, Margaret, you're raising your hand. Go ahead, please.
Well, thank you so much for an amazing presentation. You've also just given me motivation because your vision is right in line with where we as C2Ship have been heading. And everything you've put on that slide that your needs are and beyond, there are members of C2Ship currently that can help to fill that, you know. And so it's very exciting because this is very much part of the vision. Completely agree with you. And it's one of been my mantras that because of the silver tsunami, the aging of the population, wound care and care has to shift to the outpatient, decentralized. So we've been focused on that since we started this project 2018. So I'm really, really hopeful that you will join because there is so much opportunity and so many companies and startups and founders who would love the partnership because they have excellent ideas. Even what we will discuss again this in our leadership meeting, but we just talked about collaborating with several companies because what they're doing is exactly in line with your vision for the future. So I sincerely hope you guys succeed wildly because it is very much the solution and part of the solution and the need for the future.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Actually, Emma, I remember that couple of sessions before we talk about remote patient monitoring and also some of the challenges that we have today about remote patient monitoring. I'm guessing, Margaret, you mentioned that even CMS has some plan that maybe discontinue some of the reimbursement code for remote patient monitoring because we are providing tons of data to clinician, but clinician doesn't necessarily change their practice based on the data that they are getting. In other words, the data that they are seeing is not necessarily actionable to change practice. How you plan to tackle those kind of challenges? Are you seeing also those kind of problem and how we can make in remote patient monitoring as a closed loop system to better guide doctors how to act upon of the data that they are getting?
You just said it, the data that we're collecting data and there are requirements about what data is considered, you know, makes the mark for you to be able to be reimbursed for it and for it to be considered appropriate. But the data we're collecting is because we lack better bedside diagnostics and diagnosing, so to speak, which we know we can't do a machine or it's a whole different regulatory pathway to make that, you know, prove that out. But I think like what we discussed was it last Friday or the Friday before in our leadership meeting, it's getting better tools, using the AI and then doing the research to prove it out, that it works, that it's accurate, that it can be trusted. So that's why I said this is the vision for the future. I had a doctor, very prominent in the wound care space. And he said, I could care less if I get another product. I don't need another dressing. I have plenty. He says, what I don't have is enough bedside diagnostics, things I can use right at the bedside, get the information I need to inform the treatment and to change or make decisions about treatment. Because there's a philosophy we say, if we're doing a test will not change your treatment plan, then don't waste the money to do that test. Because then what's the purpose? It's just for your head knowledge, but you're really not going to use it to make change your decision. So I think that is really the big focus is how do we use what we have in technology to get better information that will be actionable at the bedside, whether it's telehealth, you know, real time, that's what clinicians are lacking.
Very wise word. Actually, I'm seeing the comment from Fartash as well. They are one of the startup members of C2Ship and one of the hopefully soon recipient of ARPA-H grants to design technology that can collect the bedside information to provide, again, the right product and the right time to the right patient. Fartash, do you want to elaborate on your comment?
Absolutely. Pleasure to meet you, Emma. My question is more about your vision on AI implementation in wound care. So, what are the low-hanging fruits that you see that it can be integrated today? And what are the roadblocks that you think the AI integration may encounter for the wound management? Thank you.
Yeah, I think my vision for AI is very simple, and that is let doctors be doctors and nurses be nurses, because I think AI can do everything else. And I think we need to be able to return clinicians to hands-on care. And we see AI, in use today. In wound care, mainly through wound imaging. There's lots of technology out there that now not only will give you the dimensions of the wound, so it's crazy to think we didn't always know if the wound was progressing or going backwards. But we now tell you about the tissue types, and even as a clinical decision support tool, make some suggestions. Okay, it can know this is the formulary that you have, and therefore, based on the image that we've taken, based on the medical history of this patient, this is the product we would suggest, and here's all the literature behind it. I think, when I said like doctors be doctors and nurses be nurses, particularly for doctors, you spend so much time on documentation. Using AI to prevent you, when you get audited, to be able to press a button and show all those patients' records, to be able to show that you did everything in the right way, that you have all the evidence, all the documentation behind it, can really help trying to avoid those clawback situations that can occur. That can take a lot of pressure off a doctor, and really allow them to focus on what matters, which is their patient, and not I forgot to tick a box. So even having AI there to say, okay, this is the prescription for this patient, I'm just checking you've done A, B, C, and D, or and it actually can even say do A, B, C, and D for you. I think that's where it has to be somewhat seamless to work alongside those clinical needs. But for me, it's about removing that whole burdensome documentation part, and that's a lot of what we see today. I think in terms of roadblocks, you always have the questions around cybersecurity. You've got the obvious one, integration with the electronic medical records, and how do you get all these systems to speak to each other? And I think if we don't make them agnostic, that becomes another problem. Because then, there's nothing worse if you go to a hospital and say, I've got another digital platform for you to introduce. The IT department are not going to welcome you with opening arms. So I think it's, how do we work together to make these systems all be able to work with each other seamlessly?
It's amazing. Yes, I fully agree. Actually, we have another great member of our C2ship from SmartTech 21, and Paul is here. And they're trying to also create a better interface for patient and care providers to address this problem. Emma, as you know, almost 40% or to 80% of the conversation happening between patient and doctor are forgotten by patient, and we need to have something to coach them. Paul, I saw that you raised your hands. Do you have any comment or any question on that?
Absolutely, Bijan. Thank you for taking my question. And Emma, it's a pleasure to meet you. All right. I heard an interesting quote, I guess about a week ago or so. I read it somewhere where they said, life is what happens in between doctor's appointments. So, part of what we talk about, particularly long care patient journeys like wound management, that's a snippet of time where you're in front of a healthcare professional, and the vast majority of time that you're on your own. All right. So one of the things that we've learned at SmartTech 21 and through working with Bijan and C2ship is that medical communication is one of the simply most powerful tools that there is. and that keeping patients engaged, making sure that patients know that they can communicate with their care team on a regular basis, providing a patient with a regimen of some sort that's highly customized and germane to their situation, which keeps them enthusiastic, keeps them engaged, and, for lack of a better term, keeps them on board with the program. So we've worked with Bijan and his team in a number of areas like oncological surgery. We've worked with the VA on like cardiopulmonary rehabilitation. We're faced in a number of different projects, and we've come to learn the following, is that number one, anybody can remotely monitor someone. Their sensors, you collect the data, you spit it back. But how do you produce an experience that a patient finds valuable enough to change their very habits? All right, so we believe that we're on to something here at Intelitech. We are probably one of the very, very, very few companies in the patient engagement set that insists on giving a patient a Galaxy tablet. Why? Because it's a horrible business move. A Galaxy tablet is very expensive. However, a Galaxy tablet allows you to have 100% authority over that device, because the industry has learned that when you take the cheaper route of providing an app on someone's personal device, that app shows up in different places every time, frustration sets in, things don't happen like they're supposed to because you don't own the real estate, and engagement falls off a cliff. So, at Smart Tech 21, we would welcome having the opportunity to speak with you, Emma, at your convenience, because we think we have developed not only a unique device called the personal virtual assistant, but a strong scientific backbone surrounding highly specific protocols.
Yeah, that's very important. I love, again, this is one of the purpose of our think tank, hopefully connecting people together and building partnership to improve impact. So definitely patient engagement is very important. I know that we are passing the time, but we have two questions on the chat box that I would like to go through it. One from Panta, it's a great researcher from University of North Dakota, one of the member of C2SHIP, that she did amazing research on pressure ulcer. And the second one is from Dr. David Klonoff, who is great advocate for digital health. He's head of diabetes science and technology. Panta, go ahead, please. We have very shortish in time. I really appreciate if you can be brief on your question.
Sure. Thank you so much. Great talk. I'd like to know, so you mentioned that you have some approaches for pressure injuries. I'd like to know what are those approaches you have, strategies you have for prevention of pressure injuries?
Yeah, I mean, so the business today is very much product based. It's based around dressings to prevent pressure ulcers. But with that is a significant education program that comes alongside it, run by our clinical specialist team, and I think that it works very well. But the challenge I have with pressure ulcer prevention is that we will go into, say, a major account. We will help baseline their current incidence so they understand their actual baseline numbers. We'll educate, we'll train, we'll introduce the product, and then we re-audit 6 months later and show them how much better the situation is. But then what happens is you might have a clinical champion who's working with you inside the hospital. They move on. And so you then move on as well. You've gone to your next account, and then you turn back a year later and go, oh, what's happened to that hospital? Why is their incidence rate back up? So it's about how do you make these things more embedded? And I think that's where that needs to be our next level of pressure ulcer prevention is, and it goes back to the comments that were just made about it being habitual, that Paul spoke about. It's okay. So, we look at putting sensor technology into the dressings, and also it's also from that sustainability aspect, how do we risk stratify? Who are the patients that really are at risk and need, people go, it's just a dressing. It's not expensive, it's just a dressing. Believe me, the number of dressings add up very quickly. It becomes very expensive. You've got turning and positioning, and you've got education of your clinician, you've got education of the patient and their family carers. So all of this needs to be brought together, and a lot of this resonated with what Paul was saying, is how do you engage them and empower them to be part of that process, so that actually you embed these processes to prevent pressure ulcers regardless of the care setting, and it's not something that only gets done when you're there reminding people to do it.
Definitely.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Dr. Kronoff.
Hi, I thought this was a really good high-level presentation. I'd love to hear a second presentation by you in the future about specific programs. You couldn't do both. You couldn't do high level and specifics today. And I would say I'd like to hear a focus on what are the specific outcomes, that is, how effective are your programs, and what are the economic implications of your programs? How cost effective are they?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to give you a high level answer, but where we're trying to get to, and it will take as many years, is to shift basically the payment structure from fee for service in wound care to fee for outcome. Ultimately, that's where we want to be. That is not something Monlycke can ever do on its own. But that is the only thing that's really going to radically change that delivery of wound care, is when we actually switch from fee for service to fee to outcome. And what does that look like? We talk about value-based healthcare. I've talked about value-based healthcare for 30 years. I've never been able to deliver it. But I think this is where digital is really going to allow us to truly develop value-based healthcare, because we'll have all the data. So we'll be, and when we have all the data, we can start getting into different payment models, start talking about risk sharing with insurers, because we can say to them, right, I guarantee if you put this ecosystem of care in place, you'll spend less money and you'll get better outcomes. And now, by having all that data there, you can, the problem with that, we used to always do that with pressure ulcer prevention. It never worked, because then you would have bank nurses who would come in on the night shift and they wouldn't know there was a protocol in place for pressure ulcer prevention. They wouldn't know that they needed to turn that patient. By bringing in sensors and digital, you can kind of look at your data and go, right, I'm going to ignore that set of data because it wasn't compliant data, and this set I am. And suddenly you can then genuinely get into having, it's very much a future long-term vision, but changing how we pay for healthcare. And I think that's going to require much more than just manufacturers. That requires every stakeholder to work together to get there. But it's only at that point. People tell me there's not enough money in healthcare. And I always answer, God, there's plenty of money in healthcare, but 50% of it is wasted. And
I really liked your approach. Thank you. This also shows the value of real world evidence, that you can do data mining to figure out what works, what doesn't work.
What an amazing closing. And actually, Dr. Kronoff, also editor-in-chief of Diabetes Science and Technology Journal. I have pleasure to publish several papers here, including a smart socks. Actually, the first paper was published on that journal. So it's amazing. And Emma, as actually Margaret said, we would love to have Monlycke as one of the member of our C2ship, because we have all the stakeholders, as you mentioned here. There are business, a small business, large in business, that they are sharing the same vision as yours, as well as amazing faculties here and resources there. So we are hoping to build partnership and advance that field forward. Thank you so much. I know that you are in UK, it's a late evening, and I really appreciate your patience with staying beyond of our time. And thank you everyone for joining the meeting. Happy Friday, and see you all next Friday.
Thank you.